Welcome to Stranger Than Fiction, where you can test your ability of keen observation. Now, this week's episode has a theme: old urban legends. Listen to 3 stories and see if you can pick out which one you think is true. If there's something about Halloween that's consistent, it's that every year someone always tries to top what happened the year before. But let's see what happens when someone takes things a little too far. Halloween is a very festive time of year. Every time it comes around, it always creates a desire to top the previous year. I've had friends one year wear a funny costume, only to be consumed for weeks prior to the following Halloween under the pressure of doing one better than before. Often it's all in jest and makes things fun. Every year the friend that hosts Halloween often creates fun themes and gives everyone a common prompt to work off. Then it's fun to see how people adapt. It really is an amazing outlet for creativity. Everyone has their favourite part too: costumes, trick-or-treating, haunted house events. As a kid, I loved the pre-Halloween local event. My town used the field and machinery of a rather friendly farmer. He had a small tractor that pulled everyone around in little carts. His barn's exterior was adorned with terrifying decor. Hay bales were set up like obstacle courses. There was lots to do as a kid, but they were inclusive to adults too, knowing that Halloween is enjoyed by them too. Of course, in different ways. For the adults, food carts and mobile bars were set up. I know the idea of mixing heavy alcohol and playing kids sounds like a bad idea, but this was a town where everyone knew each other, so it was social damnation to go too crazy at this event. Everyone knew to behave. All in all, this event was amazingly ran, and was the highlight of many of my childhood Halloweens. Sadly, it only took one tragic moment to make things turn sour. This event had been a staple in our town for so long that the kids that grew up on it were coming to an age where they wanted to get involved. This reinforced a positive ideal of community to the adults, and so they were enthused at the idea of the youth getting involved. So that year, things would be different. On top of the hayride, hay playground and decorations, these teens would organise some scares for the kids' side of the party. This gave the adults more time and resources to add to the more grown-up parts of the event. What the teens settled on was a detour on the hayride. Rather than the hayride simply going in circles around the field, they planned for the barn doors to be opened on both ends and the tractor to pull through the barn. Inside, they would organise some fun, home-brewed scares. They added lights, speakers, and a lot of props. On paper, it was going to be amazing. On top of all this, they decided to add some theatrics. The leader of this idea, Brian, decided to save the best trick for himself. The time came and the night started. At first, they gave the illusion that things would be the same. The barn was decorated on the outside similar to how it was the previous year. The ride went around in circles outside, and the playground was set up like before. However, when the sun started to set more and darkness swept over the field, the organisers persuaded all the kids to get on the hayride. Some were hesitant, as it did kind of get boring after a while, but with the pressure we all hopped on. The floodlights kicked in, and only then did the barn doors slowly creak open. We immediately knew things were different, and that amazing mixed feeling of fear and excitement filled us all. The tractor detoured into the barn, as was planned, and there the theatrics began. What they organized blew our little minds. Smoke machines covered the room for dramatic effect, speakers played wretched screams periodically, lights silhouetted the visage of vaguely threatening shapes. Needless to say, we were terrified. Then the main event. On a makeshift gallows stood Brian. He wore Victorian garb and screamed at us about his death sentence. Then he tied a noose hanging from the rafters around his neck, and then stepped off the edge. He struggled around, mimicking death throes, and eventually fell silent. Of course, despite the smoke machine making it hard to make out, some of us could see that one foot was always on the ground. After that, the ride started back up, and we were soon back out. Of course, the teenagers took things way too far for the majority of our age group, and a lot of the younger kids had to be taken home. But all in all, it was the most memorable haunted ride I'd ever ridden. Throughout the night, the tractor would randomly swoop back into the barn. The screams would start back up, the smoke washed over our eyes, and the lights flared ominously. And each time, Brian would be there, the centerpiece to it all, hanging threateningly, like a warning to those who misbehaved. After a few more rounds, however, a lot of concerned adults started rushing around. This caused rampant rumors. As for the kids, the adults were usually unfazed throughout the event, so seeing the adults genuinely getting scared caused whispers. Some said a real ghost appeared, an old apparition that was insulted by Brian's performance. Others said a killer was on the loose and made his way to the field. And silly rumors started, like one of the kids pooped himself on the ride and they had to close it down. We didn't get very far with our theories before all the parents quickly collected their kids and we were all promptly escorted home. I remember being very upset at this, as this had been the most fun Halloween party I'd been to yet. Those kids really added to the experience, and I was excited to keep on playing. After that night, the town was rather solemn. The adults acted differently after that, and the kids never knew why. A lot of our town's urban legends spawned from this, as we had a desire to fill this missing gap of knowledge with something. It wasn't until I was much older that I finally found out what had happened. It turns out that Brian wasn't faking when he was hanging there the whole night. Originally, he was supposed to have the noose around his neck, like what happened during the show. He was then supposed to feign coming back to life and give a mortifying speech. However, the latter part never came. Originally, the others thought he was nervous, and so wasn't fazed when he didn't deliver his speech. During the ride, about 40 people were driven past the exhibit. During practice, the stunt went off without a hitch. But after a while of his speech not coming, the tractor driver started to suspect it wasn't nerves that was causing him to not speak up. Halloween gone wrong is a running trope for Campfire Tales. But is this the one urban legend that breaks the mold? This next urban legend is an absolute classic. So old, its roots predate the internet. But did this legend come from an event that actually happened? always trust teenagers to find obscure spots in any town or city and make it a hangout spot. I swear it's the law of the land. For the longest time in our school, there was one infamous area which the kids called Lover's Lane. A corny name, I know, but it added an air of mischief and teenage rebellion to it. It was where all the cool kids hung out, and the nerdy kids would edge around, trying to break into the inner circle. Looking back, our school was particularly toxic with its clique mentality, but something happened which humbled all the regular attendants of that place. It was during a late weekend night, while school couples were making out in the dark with the radio on. Late in the evening, the music suddenly cut off. The radio station that was favoured had a segment where they played music on weekend evenings almost always uninterrupted. Great for background noise, because who wants to hear a forcibly enthusiastic DJ that no one cared about shout clickbaity things to keep interest? So it was notable when the music suddenly stopped and was taken over by a rather serious voice. The person went on to announce a warning to all the local residents of the small town that the asylum on the outskirts had an escapee on the loose. They went on to say that people in town should stay indoors and shouldn't expect anything bad as it was a bit away from the asylum. The problem these teens faced is the hangout spot just outside of town happened to be in the direction of the ward, placing them only about half a mile away. Things didn't get any better when they announced who had escaped, a name which was rather known in my town. Though they never specified why he was locked up on the radio, when they said the name Paul Townsend, they all knew it was serious. Paul Townsend was a serial killer who for some reason had a vendetta specifically with the residents of my town, something which not even he could explain, and along with a mix of other problems, was the reason he was institutionalized rather than incarcerated. His signature tool, which was consistent with all of his killings, was a stainless steel butcher's hook. Naturally, the teens got frightened, and one girl asked to be taken home. And naturally, the boy she was with, overcome with boyhood hormones, suggested that they can just lock their doors and carry on making out. When he tried to kiss her, she pushed him away, serious about leaving. Giving in to her demands, in frustration, the boy put his foot down and peeled away, speeding home in a strop. When they finally got home, she was relieved. They kissed each other goodbye, and the girl left the car. However, when she turned to close it, she started to scream uncontrollably. The seriousness was enough to wake the boy out of his frustrated daze, and he sped around to see what was wrong. What he saw was a hook, coated in dried blood, hanging off the passenger side door handle. A cautionary tale for teens to not be left alone. Is this the legend based on truth? If you're on the internet as much as I am, you'll know a lot of strange stories come from Florida. Is this another bizarre true story that comes from this state? Florida has amassed a rather insane perception. It seems so many bizarre happenings have originated from here that it's become a sort of meme. Just search Florida Man and you'll know what I mean. Needless to say, I have a lot of stories to tell. One of them, however, was something I was a part of firsthand. When I was a teen, I worked part-time at a golf resort in Palm Beach. I caddied, cleaned, served beers. I was working the morning shift one day when a group of regulars came in. 4 guys that always had a weekly bet going on, with various forfeits for the loser. They were a fun bunch, though could get a bit riled up when they got especially competitive. I signed them in pretty quickly, as they already knew the process back to front at this point, and they were on their way. They often opted to have no assistance, as they were a group and didn't like having a stranger around. This way, they could be themselves. When they came back, I noticed there were only 3 of them. They didn't seem too bothered at first, and this eventually came up in conversation. They explained that during the rounds, one got particularly impatient. I remembered the one missing as the one who'd often lost, so I could imagine they ripped on him a little more than the rest. They figured he'd simply went on ahead to play on his own, thinking he could do better without the constant distractions. They were satisfied with this idea, until I told them I hadn't seen him return. This shook them a bit, but they then resolved that he might have simply fallen behind somewhere and was still on the field. So the other 3 hung around at the bar, keeping an eye out for him to return. A few minutes passed, which turned to an hour, then 2. After the 3rd hour, they started to realize how serious things were. They went out to check if he'd left in secret. However, his car was still parked outside. A search was put out, and the only thing that was found were his clubs, left near the water banks of the 7th hole. Soon, the police were involved. The resort closed the range for the rest of the day while the search teams were sent out. They even got the dogs involved. This ran into the thick of night and was eventually called off when no other traces were found. We had a real mystery on our hands. Eventually, we reopened under the pretense that security be tightened up. We had a new buddy system policy that no one was to be left alone while the investigation was still underway. We brought in all the attendants to accompany lone golfers and gave more hours to ensure the policy was kept up with. It was 3 days later when one of the caddies noticed something whilst with a golfer on the 7th hole. Out from the water, Ole Mose was spotted, lurking near the bank. Ole Mose was an American crocodile that was an infrequent course visitor for over 20 years. We never had much concern about Ole, as it was Florida, crocs are common, and Ole Mose always made a hasty retreat whenever he saw someone coming. Still, it was rather suspect that he popped up at that exact spot in such a turbulent time. So of course, rumors spread like wildfire. This was bad for business, and anyone who knew the croc felt Ole was innocent. However, when rumors start, it's very hard to stop them with just testimonies. So a committee of the course officials, SPCA, lawyers, citizen groups, police department, and even the mayor decided that for the peace of mind for everyone, they would unzip Ole, if you will. Humanely, of course, Ole was put to sleep and opened up. And what flooded out was a wet pile of answers. The remains that were found were positively identified as the golfer that went missing. I've heard that crocodiles are so common in Florida that people call them swamp dogs. Did this unfortunate run-in with an apex predator really happen? So, now that we've listened to all 3, let's see if you have what it takes to pull the truth out of the fiction. Comment below which story you think is true. Is it the first story of a Halloween scare gone wrong? How about the second story of two teenagers who came close to a run-in with a serial killer? Or how about the third story of a friendly golf game cut short by a terrifying force of nature? Feel free to pause the video now and lock your answer in the comments below. Though story 2 may have some roots in a real-life Lover's Lane's murders, the story has been distorted to a work of fiction. Story 3 was a chainmail, accompanied by a rather gruesome image of a crocodile being cut open. Some versions even name the golf resort. However, when approached, the owners simply laughed out the story. The American crocodile is an endangered species and do not come up as far as Palm Springs, showing that this story stays in the realm of fiction. If you figured out it was story 1, you were right. This story was based on the real-life hanging of Brian Jewell, aged 17, recorded in the Chicago Tribune in October 1990. Did you get it right? Congratulations if you did. Urban legends are the roots of how we enjoy creepypastas and other online horror stories to this day. So it's nice to pay homage to these wonderful tales shared before a time where you can simply click a button to pass them on. Until next time, where we determine if reality is stranger than fiction.